Why do I see dead people? Submitted by Reddit user Tulsa Nurse 1. I see people. I quit sleeping in my bedroom because I started seeing people. It's terrifying. I get so scared that I can't say or do anything. The first one was a beautiful lady. It happened approximately 4 to 5 years ago. She had an off-white, long dress. She was floating. She was very calm, peaceful. I think she looked like an angel. And then I saw a white man, about 5'8", in his 60s, and he was with a tall black man in his 50s. These two were also dressed in 1800s attire. Then I saw 2 little girls, maybe around 8 years old. They were dressed in the same era clothing. Then I saw those 2 men again, except this time one of them had a gun, an old one. They walked over to my bed. The other guy looked at my dresser mirror and said one sentence, but I have no idea what he said. I also saw the scariest thing one time. It was a person-looking thing, but it had lime green, almost fluorescent-looking dreadlocks. I don't know if it was black or white or whatever. It was between the wall and the tall headboard of my bed, but my headboard is up against my wall, so that's when I stopped sleeping in my bed. I moved downstairs, and that was almost 3 years ago. What sucks is that I started seeing people downstairs too. Except this time the era was different. It was more current, maybe 30 years or so earlier than today. I have stairs as soon as you walk in my front door, and there was an older lady, 60s or 70s, and she was holding the hand of another adult lady with Down syndrome. They went upstairs. This lady was really loving to the girl. Then I saw the 2 little girls again, and the last time I saw anything, it was 2 guys, pretty current or within at least the last 20 years, and one guy had a legal-like notepad that he was carrying and talking to the other guy. The 2 guys were in their early 30s. I haven't seen anyone in 5 to 6 months, but in my heart, I know that I will. It is just a matter of time. I used to sleep well before all of this started happening. Now my sleep history is so bad. I leave the TV on because I've never seen people when it's been on. I wake up every 1 to 3 hours now because I'm so uneasy, and the sofa sleeper is anything but comfortable. I even spent $5,000 on a Tempur-Pedic mattress thinking it would help me start sleeping in my bedroom again. That was almost 2 years ago, and I've only slept in the new bed once. It feels like everyone I've seen was a nice person except for that green hair thing. I live right next to a riverbank, if that matters, and I've lived in this townhome for 7 years. I've also seen orbs, but not since I stopped sleeping upstairs. Does anybody have an idea why this started happening to me? And how I can get the courage to start sleeping in my bed again? Recent personal paranormal experience. Submitted by Reddit user Flaky Economics 7963. I will first preface this by saying I am naturally quite skeptical, as I've not really experienced any strange or paranormal occurrences until today, and I'm still not sure what to make of what has happened. I was alone in my room earlier today perusing YouTube. I had one headphone over my ear and the other one exposed as I was home alone, aside from my dogs, one of which was already in her kennel because she decided to try and eat the couch, and I wanted to be able to hear the other one in case she decided to destroy the house. Suddenly, I heard my mom's voice in the living room. She wasn't at the house, though, and I didn't hear her come in through the door, and the dogs didn't start barking as they always do if someone pulls into the driveway. Naturally, this startled me and made me feel quite uneasy, but I quickly began to doubt if I had really heard it or not, and if I didn't, I might be going mad because it sounded external and not super clear as if it was in my head. A couple of minutes had passed, and just as I was feeling calm, I heard and felt the wooden floorboards in the hallway just outside my bedroom door creak and depress. I immediately began telling myself it was probably my dog, but I didn't hear her nails tapping on the floor, so I thought that was odd. Also, in order to make those floorboards creak, quite a lot of weight must be pushed onto it. I weigh about 170 pounds, and it hardly creaks when I walk on it, and since my dog only weighs about 50 pounds, I don't think it'd be possible for her to do this. At this point, I was convinced someone had broken into the house, so I armed myself with a baseball bat and decided to check it out. Yes, I have seen horror films and realized that it's typically not a good idea. Nevertheless, I stepped out of my room and entered the living room/dining room where I heard the voice. Once I entered the dining room, I stood still for a moment, and the floorboards in front of me started creaking, and I heard footsteps. Startled, I took a few steps back and continued my search of the house. No one was inside, and there was no signs of forced entry. I'm not sure what the appropriate response to this might be. I just figured I'd share it since this sort of thing has never happened to me until now. According to my mom, our house is haunted, and she commonly experiences these strange events when she is home alone. People in the Woods. Submitted by Reddit user tommyjhnsn. I was pretty young when this happened, about 10 years old, so my memory might be a little off. My grandma used to come stay with my family sometimes during the summer to watch me and my siblings while my parents were at work. We lived in a massive house with 8 sliding glass doors surrounded by about 20 acres of woods, with a main road about half a mile away. So one night, my parents decided to go out after work, and it was just myself and my grandma at the house. It was getting dark, and we were hanging out in the kitchen while she cooked. I looked up at my grandma, and she was staring out the window pretty intensely. I asked her what she was looking at, and she told me to look myself because she was getting older and her vision wasn't great. On the hillside behind my house, I saw what looked like 5 to 6 small people sitting on the hill staring right at the house. They were all dressed in dark colors, and they weren't moving at all. She asked me if I saw them too, and when I said yes, she immediately locked all the upstairs doors and rushed me into the master bedroom, top floor on that same side of the house. She was in a panic and called my dad, while I checked the window to see if they were still there. 2 of them were now standing up, while the other few were still sitting and staring. She told me to stay quiet and get in the closet as my dad was on his way home. We got out the shotgun and sat there for about a half hour. When my dad got home, he told us nobody was in the woods and everything was fine. Now, I would say this could just be kids trespassing, but we had no neighbors with kids anywhere near us. We had barbed wire fencing around most of the property, and it'd be very hard to get back to the house any other way than the driveway. Also, these people or things were small, probably 4 feet tall. I think they were wearing gowns. I don't know how to explain this or what I saw, but any explanation would be appreciated. The Ghostly Boy of Okinawa. Submitted by Reddit user gonzojeff. Several people requested to hear my stories from Japan, so here's the first one, which is a doozy. My wife and I lived for nearly 5 years on the island of Okinawa, which anyone who's ever lived there will tell you has a well-deserved reputation for being very haunted. Some of the atrocities that took place there during World War II were absolutely horrifying. Combine that with a native culture that has a strong belief in ancestor worship, and it's apparently an ideal recipe for the presence of lots and lots of restless spirits. Every year, Okinawa celebrates the Festival of Oban. with customs and traditions that are quite different from those of mainland Japan. The purpose of Obon is to commemorate one's ancestors, and the belief is that the spirits return to this world for 3 days to visit family. The timing of those 3 days is based on the lunar calendar, so the exact dates vary from year to year, but they usually fall in early August. The first day is the welcoming day. Families visit the tombs where their ancestors' remains are kept, and they escort the spirits home, where a family altar is set up with offerings of their favorite food and drinks. On the second day, family members pray to their ancestors at the family altar, often traveling from one home to another to pay respects to all of their ancestors. The final day of Obon is when the family gathers to celebrate with a lavish dinner, after which they escort the ancestors back to the spirit realm with the help of teams of Issa dancers that parade through every town and village. It's an amazing festival and cultural tradition, but it's also considered to be the time in Okinawa every year when spirits of the dead are the most active. As luck would have it, our family moved into our new house on Okinawa in early August during Obon. It was me, my wife, our dog Sparky, and my wife's 2 sons who were ages 8 and 12 at the time. Let's call the younger one Brian and his older brother Jack. The house had 3 bedrooms, arranged side to side in a long hallway. Jack's room was at one end of the hallway, my wife and I had the room on the other end, and Brian's room was the one in the middle, between the other 2. On our second night in the new house, we told the kids it was time for them both to go to bed. Jack went off to brush his teeth with no fuss, took Sparky into his room with him, closed the door, and went to sleep. Brian refused, though. We figured that he was simply not tired yet on account of the jet lag we were all experiencing after the recent flight from USA to Japan. My wife and I told Brian he had to go to bed, even if he didn't feel tired, so he could get his body clock reset to the local time. He kept resisting, though, becoming less and less silly and more agitated. Finally, he broke down and started crying, and at that point we knew something else was seriously wrong because this was not normal behavior for him. We hugged Brian and got him to calm down, and we tried to get him to share whatever was bothering him. It took a little while for him to open up, but then he told us an amazing story. Brian said that during the previous night, our first night in the house, he couldn't sleep on account of the jet lag. In the middle of the night, he heard a noise, and he looked up to see the door to his room slowly opening. A little boy, roughly his age, walked into the room, illuminated by the light filtering through the window blinds from the street lamp outside. The boy walked over to the corner, and he started looking at Brian's toys that were on top of his suitcase. After a moment, the little boy looked up at Brian, and then simply disappeared. Brian told us through his tears that he was afraid to sleep in his room because the ghost boy might come back. My wife and I both thought it was possible that Brian had dreamed all of this. He wasn't the sort of kid who just made up stories of this sort. Whatever the case, he was legitimately terrified to sleep in his room, so we told Brian he could come sleep with us in our room for the night, and he did. The door to our room was shut all night long, and we slept relatively soundly. The next morning, I was up early to get ready for work. Jack was awake too, and he joined me in the kitchen while I was making breakfast. My wife and Brian were both still sleeping. Because Jack had gone to bed before Brian got upset the night before, he had no knowledge about Brian's story or the fact that he had slept with us. Out of the blue, Jack said to me, "I'm really worried about Brian." I asked him why, and he said, "I think maybe he's upset about moving here. I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the bathroom, and I could hear Brian in his room just sobbing. He sounded so sad." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Brian spent the entire night with us in our room, sound asleep. So, who did Jack hear crying in Brian's bedroom? The next year, my wife saw the little ghost boy too, but that's another story. The Return of the Japanese Ghost Boy, submitted by Reddit user gonzojeff. This story is a follow-on to The Ghostly Boy of Okinawa. In that one, I told the tale of the time my 8-year-old stepson Brian, not his real name, saw the ghost of a Japanese boy his age entering his room and playing with his toys on the very first night he slept in our new house in Okinawa. The next night, his older brother also heard the ghost boy crying. A little less than a year later, my wife saw the same boy, we think. It was late afternoon. I was still at work. Both kids were out playing with friends, and my wife was at home alone. While she was in the bathroom brushing her hair, she saw in the mirror a young boy quickly walk past the open doorway behind her. The direction he went only led from our bedroom into the walk-in closet, which had no other way in or out. She didn't get a good look at the boy, but he was about the same height as Brian, and at that age, Brian loved sneaking up on people to try and scare them. So, she assumed that Brian was at home, and he was trying to creep into the closet so that he could spring out and surprise her as she left the bathroom. My wife decided to turn the tables on him, so she snuck up to the open closet door, and she jumped inside, yelling, "Boo!" Brian wasn't in the closet. She was all alone. My wife was immediately freaked out because she knew for a fact that she saw a boy walk behind her into that closet. There was no way anyone could sneak back out without her seeing. The closet had no other doors and no windows. She checked and there was definitely nobody hiding anywhere. The boy had simply vanished into thin air. As my wife was trying to figure out what just happened, she heard the front door slam. This time it really was Brian actually arriving home. None of us ever saw the ghost boy again after that, but other weird things happened in that house while we lived there. Sometimes our dog would bark or growl at something none of the rest of us could see, which was totally out of character for him. And one time, my wife and I both saw a TV remote fly off of a table all by itself. The house always draws us back. Submitted by Reddit user Kelsey L3. Now, whether you actually believe in the paranormal, or just enjoy reading spooky stories in an attempt to scare yourself, this is one of the many paranormal experiences I've had. Arguably the most terrifying, converting one of the eyewitnesses from a skeptic to completely believing in the paranormal and actually taking it seriously. My friends and I have always been quite fond of going out urbex exploring. For those of you that don't know what that is, it's when you go out and look for abandoned and derelict buildings to explore and photograph. We didn't go out searching for the haunted side of things. We just enjoyed the eeriness and also the beauty of old abandoned places. Living in Scotland, a lot of these abandoned places were normally surrounded by amazing scenery, from hills and mountains to thick forests and lush fields, so we always made a day of it when we did go exploring. One house in particular was our favorite, so much so that we had already visited a couple of times prior to this experience. Myself and two of my best friends, we will call them C and B, decided to go back, but the condition of the place had declined quite rapidly since the last time we had been, and everything seemed very unstable, but we didn't let that stop us. Finding that our usual entry spot had been boarded up, we felt quite defeated, but decided to look for another entry anyway. After searching around for a while, we noticed that the roof on one side of the lowest parts of the house had been damaged by fire and was practically all gone. It wasn't the easiest to get up to, using a tree and each other to do so, but we finally got in. It was going relatively normal. We were wandering around the inside, searching and admiring the rooms we could still get into, being terrified by the occasional bird, being spooked by our footsteps, and taking photos of the amazing architecture. However, something was different this time. The whole place felt off, and a little more eerie than it normally did. I've always been what you could describe as spiritually inclined, so I felt this more than what my friends did. One of them was a complete skeptic, so he just brushed it off and said we were over-exaggerating and making things up. His mind was going to be completely changed after leaving this house. After exploring the top 3 floors as much as we could, cringing at the spray paint, quote-unquote art the vandals had left, we were on the ground floor just having a chat and discussing how much the house's condition had really declined. We were standing in one of the hallways, almost in a triangle formation. I was standing in a door frame with my back towards an empty room, with C to my left and B to my right. I was still feeling a little uneasy, but I didn't give that much thought. As we were all conversing about the plans for the rest of the day, I felt something on my back. It felt like someone had run their hand down my back. From the base of my neck to the center of my back, I felt a firm, constant pressure until the pressure tapered off down toward the base of my back. It was over within seconds. I felt all the color drain from my face as I frantically jumped forward with a scream. B and C both looked at me in confusion and asked what happened and if I had hurt myself. In a haze of confusion and dizziness, I wasn't able to form any words, never mind describing what I had just felt. I regained my bearings and took a couple of deep breaths before trying my best to explain the sensation of being touched. B's face turned a little pale as she saw how serious I was being. However, C was a skeptic. He laughed and thought I was joking or that I had accidentally hit something without realizing it or a bug had hit me. I knew that wasn't the case because for a split second before it happened, I felt every single hair on my body stand up as a warning to what was about to happen. Being slightly freaked out, B and myself managed to convince C that it was time to leave. On top of what had just happened, it was also starting to get a little cold. While making our way back to the same section we had entered through, I started to feel a burning sensation run down my back, like someone had taken hot coals or a flame down my back. Starting to freak out again, I asked B to check if there was anything there. I automatically knew something was wrong because she didn't give me a response. She was just silent. Next thing I knew, B was calling over C to come and look, which made my anxiety spike up more. From the look on C's face, I became increasingly worried. They both nervously told me that there were marks going down my back. Obviously not being able to see my back myself, I then asked them to take a photo for me to see. Looking at the photo, there were 3 distinctive scratches down my back, exactly where I had felt someone or something touching me. At first, C was convinced I had done it myself, or caught myself on something, but after examining the scratches more, he determined that it couldn't have been. The scratches went under my bra strap, which would have been impossible for me to do without them noticing. At this point, we were all trying to keep our calm while internally freaking out. We tried to make our way out as quick as we could without injuring ourselves, climbing back over the wall of the house and through the hole where the roof used to be. We collectively walked a few feet away from the house and stopped to look back. Still trying to understand what had just happened, we all agreed that we'd go back to the car and never come back here. The walk back to the car, which took around 20 minutes, was relatively uneventful. Apart from a continuous uneasy feeling that we were being watched or followed, and occasionally thinking we could hear footsteps behind us, it was actually quite peaceful, taking in the Scottish countryside. We got to the car where we sat and had a smoke, still trying to completely calm ourselves down. It's safe to say that after that day, C took a long time to process the events, but undoubtedly became a believer. We swore to never come back to this house, but for some reason, we're always drawn back to it. It's like an urge to come back and visit, like an itch that you can't quite scratch. Maybe we're just drawn in by the eeriness or the mystery around that day, or maybe it's something more than that.